This podcast may contain explicit language. Welcome to the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast, the show that uses a unique grading style to redefine what the greatest movies are. I'm Tom Duncan.
And I'm Dana Duncan.
We also welcome our two newest celebrity guests. They are the hosts of Movies and Us podcast. Please welcome Jen and Sarah.
Hello, hello. Thank you for having us. Exciting to be introduced as a celebrity guest. Never happened in my life before. Today is a great day. I'm more excited to dive into this movie with y'all, so we're so excited to be here.
Yep, this should be fun, and I'm not sure about the celebrity thing. That's probably the one and only time, but we will take it.
We like to kind of pump our guests up, on the front end before we start kind of rankling you and throwing you into the fire here. So unfortunately, that means we'll throw you right into the fire. So, as you know, with all new guests to the show, we like to ask a few questions to allow the audience to get to know you. So, first, tell us a little bit about yourselves, what you do, and why you love movies.
Well, hello. My name is Jen. I am based in Washington State, so I hail from the West Coast. I work as a product manager, but I spend a lot of time outside of work and on the weekends watching movies, recording, podcasting, talking about movies together with Sarah. And I discovered movies when I was younger. Obviously, it was a big part of my childhood, but I really discovered movies in college. I had a friend who was a big movie fan, and we'd go and see movies together. And it was Birdman that I saw that really just rocked my world and just opened up this whole world of movies and cinema for me. And the rest is history. And here we are talking about movies today. So that's a little bit about me. And I think the power of movies is so palpable. And it's been so exciting to see that connection that's formed with people as we rave about movies, rant about movies, all of the opinions all the time.
It's kind of interesting that the first one that really got you involved is such a polarizing film.
Yep. Yep. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's cool. That one's quite something. And when I tell this story to friends of mine that are like not super into movies, they just kind of scratch their head and are like, "Oh, okay, that one. Oh, right, good to know. I've learned a lot about you, Jen."
Yeah, I am Sarah, and I am based in the DFW area in Texas. And man, for my real job, I do a whole bunch of different things. I'm an author, an editor, I freelance for a few different companies, so I'm just kind of all over the place. And I've loved movies my whole life. Grew up watching movies as a kid, and that's just kind of been a constant for me over the years. And since we started the podcast, it's been really fun to learn more about, the film industry and like getting into the classic films that I maybe weren't exposed to when I was younger. And so just developing a greater sense of appreciation for the art form and using this creative medium to share stories and explore new worlds and make these larger points about the world around us. It's so much fun what can be done with a movie, and so we just love celebrating that on the podcast.
Yeah, I can definitely appreciate that. I've definitely developed a different sense of film knowledge since we started doing our show. You look at it much differently. I mean, I've learned more about editing and camera techniques and framing than I would have ever thought possible until you start really looking at it and paying attention so much more. So I can definitely appreciate where you've come from that. So, the dreaded second question. What is your favorite movie and why? I'll let you flip a coin to see who goes first.
I like to ask Sarah this question sometimes, and she always deflects and punts because it's hard to pick one. So I am selfishly going to ask Sarah to share hers first because I am on the edge of my seat to find out what she's chosen for this question.
Yeah, I am staunchly one of those I don't have a favorite movie because it's there's so many. Like, how do you choose just one out of all of the movies that exist in the world? How do you pick one? So I don't have a favorite, but for the purposes of this discussion, I am going to choose. I'm just going to choose Casablanca. You know what? We are talking about a Humphrey Bogart film, so we're going to go Casablanca. It is classic. You got everything you could want in a movie in Casablanca. It still holds up all these years later and has some really relevant themes to our world today. So, got to go with the classic.
You have now ingratiated yourself to my co-host immensely. That's like a top 5 for him, I swear.
Yeah.
I think the last time we watched it for the second revisit we did of that particular film, I think you said, how is this not perfect? Like, is there a more perfect movie than this?
Yeah.
It's in my top 5 too, so that's really fun. Great choice.
It's really an
Well
easy
done.
movie to love.
Mhm.
It really is.
My choice is also an incredible classic film, and it's The Godfather. So people in my life know that I really love gangster movies of all kinds, and especially Italian mob films. And this is obviously the Italian mob film that ever existed. I think that what's always fun for me watching this again is every scene that happens, I'm like on the edge of my seat being like, this is my favorite scene. And then the next scene happens and I have the same comment. And so it's probably really annoying to watch this movie with me because I'm just like giddy the whole time. But the joy does not wane and the law of diminishing return does not apply to this movie for me. So my choice is The Godfather.
So part 1 or part 2? And do they have to be taken as a whole for your favorite movie?
That's a great question. If I could get people's time for 6 hours for us to sit down and watch 1 and 2, yes, that is my choice. But I will have to go with part 1. I think part 1 is perfect in a lot of ways. Part 2 is an incredible sequel. Love it. But part 1, I think, is just all around incredible.
Part 1 is so much of the rise, it's much more easily digestible. Like, I've come around a lot more on part 2 as time has gone on, but part 1 is always going to be my favorite. It's just the much more heroic version before Michael turns to this like really dark Shakespearean Hamlet place, where he's only got himself to console.
Yes.
It just, I mean, it is a masterpiece, but it's much more difficult and less palatable.
Yeah, and the structure is so different too. I think like the cross-cutting between the two storylines, great choices there, but there's just this incredible like momentum in the first one that you just can't get enough of. So, yeah.
The rise to power is much more enjoyable than the consolidation.
Yes, and then also this like succession and handing over of the business. Yeah, good stuff there. Intergenerational stuff. Oh, I will stop talking now because I'm gonna be lost somewhere.
Oh, don't worry.
The Godfather. We're here to talk about
I could easily do the same. At least this time I don't have to mansplain about it.
Okay, Barbie.
Yeah, I know. So, anyway, final question. What makes a good movie for you?
Since I put Sarah on the spot last time for the previous question, I'll go first for this one. I think what makes a really good film is one that opens up your mind and really makes you think in whatever way. Maybe it's because you had a strong emotional reaction to it that you don't understand, or maybe there's concepts in the film that were really exciting to ponder and think about. So that lingering effect, I think, makes a really great film, and doesn't have to be one that you enjoyed. I think that aspect of it is sometimes even more interesting. And then I would say like a favorite film is often the ones that resonate personally. Like you look back on your life and you're like, that film genuinely changed my life in some meaningful way, shifted my perspective, inspired me, or opened up my heart to something different. So good and great films versus favorite films, I think, are very different. So
yeah, my answer was going to be very similar. So I'm going to say something else now. And I really love, just a strong story with compelling characters and like with something to communicate. I feel like there's some movies that you watch and you're like, what are we doing here? Like, what was the point of that? So just having that very clear, I have something that I want to communicate to you, and I'm using this really creative medium to do so. And I'm a sucker for really good world building and really strong visual style. And so if you have all of those components, you're most likely going to win me over.
There is nothing easier to get me to turn off a TV show or a movie than me saying the following: I hate every character in this.
Yeah.
I've done that on multiple occasions. Now, there are a few times where I've come back around and I'm like, okay, I need to give this another shot. Like Succession was like that. And then that became one of my favorite shows. But immediately, like the first 2 episodes, I'm like, I hate everybody on this show. Why am I watching this? Well, thank you for sitting through our gauntlet. Let's get into the movie for the evening without further ado. Tonight, for our 225th episode, we discuss one of the seminal film noirs. I guess that's films noir, like attorneys general. Right, Dad?
Yes. Grammatical pronunciation, yes.
Okay. The Maltese Falcon from 1941. As I know we've been doing mostly anniversaries, but this is one of our 25 episodes, and we've promised one of the big classic films for every 25th episode. So much like The Godfather and Wizard of Oz and Casablanca, this also takes a spot on that list. Written and directed by John Huston, music by Adolf Deutsch. Boy, that name just, every time I see it, it does not age well. Starring Humphrey Bogart as Sam Spade, Mary Astor as Ruth Wonderly / Bridget O'Shaughnessy, Gladys George as Iva Archer, Peter Lorre as Joel Cairo, Barton McLean as Lieutenant Dundee, Lee Patrick as Effie Perrine, Sidney Greenstreet as Casper Gutman, Ward Bond as Detective Tom Polhouse, Jerome Cowan as Miles Archer, Elisha Cook Jr. as Wilmer Cook, James Burke as Luke the hotel detective, Murray Alper as Frank Richmond, the taxi driver, John Hamilton as District Attorney Brian, and Walter Houston in an uncredited role as Captain Jacoby. Recognition for this movie, The Maltese Falcon, was released on October 3rd, 1941. The film was widely praised by critics and, on a budget of $375,000, would gross roughly $1.8 million. The Maltese Falcon would be also recognized by the Oscars at the time with nominations for Best Picture, Supporting Actor for Sidney Greenstreet, this was also his first film role, and Adapted Screenplay for John Huston. In 1989, the film was one of the first 25 films selected by the Library of Congress for inclusion in the National Film Registry. It has since been recognized by the American Film Institute on the following lists: 1998's AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movies at number 23, 2001's AFI's 100 Years, 100 Thrills at number 26, 2005's AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movie Quotes with The Stuff That Dreams Are Made Of at number 14, 2007's AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movies 10th Anniversary Edition at number 31, and 2008's AFI's 10 Top 10 as the number 6 mystery film of all time. The Maltese Falcon currently holds a 99% among critics on Rotten Tomatoes, a 97 score on Metacritic, and a 3.9 out of 5 on Letterboxd. So as we begin each week, Dad, what is your relationship to this film?
You know, I stopped to think about this, and I cannot remember when the first time was I saw it. I want to say that I grew up, in Wisconsin, and the Independence Channel 9 in Chicago, WGN, used to have old films on Sundays afternoons when football season wasn't going. I'd watch an old film. I want to say I watched this maybe back when I was in either junior high or high school on WGN for the first time, and was just enthralled with it at that time. So that's probably been 45, 50 years since I first saw it.
That's quite a long time.
I've seen it a lot of times since.
I would imagine so. I'll be honest, I don't remember either the first time I saw it. This is one where I've seen it probably so often that you just kind of forget the first time. I probably watched it, if not once a year, probably once every 2 years for at least a decade and a half. And I would guess that I just caught it off of TCM one of these times, and we sat down and I probably watched it with you, Dad. I'll be honest.
Probably.
That would make the most sense. But I just don't remember the first time because every time is like rewatching it the first time somehow. I don't know why, but it is. Even though I remember the structure of the scenes, there are just things that are surprising every time. Jen, how about you? What's your relationship with the film?
I am also in the camp of I don't remember the first time that I watched this film.
We are 3 for 3.
We are. I wonder if we're probably going to make a 4 for 4, probably. But I do remember watching this film in college. I took a film class and we kind of went through film history. And so we would get assignments each week to watch, like a couple of films as our homework assignment, which is the best homework assignment ever. And I remember there was a week where we watched a ton of film noirs. And so there's a combination of that plus obviously the iconic prop, and something in there is all mixed together. So I didn't remember a lot of like the exact plot points and characters of this because there's so much of iconic, film noir visuals and things like that, and types of character tropes that are in here. But the combination of that iconic prop that's referenced so many times in pop culture and things like that, along with just kind of the slew of film noirs for a week, is kind of my relationship to this film before watching it again this time.
Sarah, how about you?
Yeah, to round it out, 4 for 4, I also don't remember the first time I watched this. So I also took a film class in college, and so my guess is that maybe I watched it for the first time there, but I don't have a distinct memory of that. What I do have a distinct memory of is I got like a DVD set that had 4 classic film noirs on it, and this was one of them. And so then that is when I watched this multiple times, but it's been quite a few years since I watched it, so it was a joy to revisit it again after a few years of being away.
What are the
What
other
else was
3?
on that? Yeah, what are the other 3?
Okay, I don't remember all 3 of them, but the Postman Always Rings Twice was one of them, and then The Big Sleep was another one. I don't remember what the 4th film was, though.
I'm kind of surprised that
Double Indemnity, was it?
Yeah.
It might have been. I genuinely don't remember, but that would make sense.
Well, I mean, you got 2 Bogarts on there. I don't know if they would sneak a Wilder film on there. Even though I would say that that's probably a little bit more noirish than a couple of the other ones that are there. So what is the film actually about?
I think that
Greed.
Yes. I had wrote down in my notes, it's about the voracious, empty black hole of greed as my answer to this question. And I also wrote down here the emptiness of capitalism.
So, Dad, we often joke about how similar we are in our responses to things. I literally put down one word. I never put down one word, but I just put down greed. That's all it is.
Yeah. It's greed to the extent people will go for money.
That might be our most simple film explanation we've gotten in a while. Sarah, did you have a more profound take?
Nope. Like that's it,
Okay.
how the lengths that people will go to for greed.
Yeah, I'm struggling to find anything really profound to say outside of that. It really is everybody's after this one thing. They will cheat, lie, kill, to do whatever to get to this thing, and it's all in the pursuit of money. So
yeah, they'll prostitute themselves. They will bow to whatever they need to in order to get it, and it's all about who's going to have the most money and how they're going to get it.
Okay, so maybe a more profound or a longer question that requires more thought. Is this the film noir? I know that for American audiences, this is kind of thought to be the first American version of this, and given its place at the time, obviously Hollywood being the predominant maker of films in this era, I would obviously point back, and no discredit to the German filmmakers of the 30s, and particularly Fritz Lang with M, which I think is credited as being the first true film noir. But most people recognize this as being the first American film noir. But is it the film noir?
Something about this being the first, I think, it holds, that root source that you see so many of the themes and the tropes and the visuals and the character stereotypes all, trickling out for like decades and decades of film history. And so this is a fun question because it's so open-ended, but like the all caps something about this being the root source. I'm like, this is the origin, and everything else multiplies and builds on top of it. But that foundation laying and ushering in then this decade of, film noirs that are iconic and have influenced film history, I'm gonna say yes. But I think all of that, your point around like this being is it the American film noir versus all of the influences from German expressionism and some of the French influences as well, is if we expand out our purview instead of our American centric view, perhaps the question gets a little bit more nuanced.
I think there are better versions of the form. Like, I don't want to say that this is the quintessential one if you're studying film noir, because it doesn't engage in every single one of the tropes that its play with shadows is kind of minimal compared to some other ones, but it still has some of the same structure behind it. And I do think that if you asked anybody to name a film noir, the two that they're most likely to say are Double Indemnity and this.
Mm-hmm.
And so that has to kind of mean something.
What I would say is no, this is not. Because for a true film noir, basically you're talking about everybody who is a main character has some flaw that is dark. And we really have, in this case, a true hero within the film, which is Sam, because he's the one who plays everybody off each other and ultimately prevails. So to me, it's not a complete noir because of that factor. Double Indemnity, everybody's slimy. I mean, even Edward G. Robinson, his character is the hero, but he's a little slimy because of how he goes about trying to prove people and figure out the process and all this.
Boy, I don't know if I would go to quite that extent. I mean, in the 40s, you had to have a pretty noticeable or notable white hat to people because that's how they watched film. You didn't have the play in the gray areas like you do now with a lot of anti-heroes. So I'm not sure I'd go quite to that extent that Edward G. Robinson was not heroic or that he had some underlying character flaws in any more way than like Sam Spade is clearly like lying and pretending to be this grifter at all times to get one over on everybody else. And you obviously know that he's probably slept with his partner's wife.
Well, yeah. And?
So how is that heroic?
I mean, this is the 1940s,
Okay. I mean, sleeping with your secretary, sure. Sleeping with your partner's wife? That's a higher grade of things.
Okay.
It's okay, though, because he has a beautiful line about his partner later.
People are going to start making suggestions about you, Dad.
What? What kind of suggestions are they going to make?
Thank goodness you've never been a partner. Okay, moving on. Why is Bogart so well suited to play Sam Spade? I think he's got some very iconic characters, all of them somewhat within the same structure of being Humphrey Bogart, and yet they all feel distinct. So what exactly makes him distinct in the role of Sam Spade, and why is he so charismatic?
One of the things that I felt a lot whenever he's on screen and when he speaks this time around is like the intonations of how he like constructs sentences and delivers them, which I think is really fascinating, and it's so well aligned to who he is as a character that is incredibly grounded and practical and calculating, but there's like a little bit of warmth there that we get a little bit at the end in that ending scene, but he communicates with such clarity, and there aren't these big intonation changes and tonal changes in the way that he speaks, which is really well aligned to the lack of emotion that he displays for what's right for his character, which I think I felt a lot more compared to some of the other characters that are in his orbit that are very emotive and expressive in how they communicate their words and how it comes out of their mouths. So there's kind of this just like matter of factness in the way he speaks that I think is really interesting and fun.
We can say what you mean, Mary Astor.
Yes. Oh, the melodrama is dripping off the screen. That one.
And he's just so cool too. I think that's the other like part of like Bogey is he just had, like you said, he had that charisma. He is just a cool guy. And in this movie, he is a cool guy private detective. And so part of being the cool guy is that you seem to have this air about, I don't care about anything because I'm just so cool. I'm above it all. Nothing phases me. You have a gun in my face. It doesn't matter. I'm too cool. I'm going to take it from you. So I love that you can see just Bogey's natural charisma just playing on the screen in this. And it's a great role for him to showcase that.
I mean, yes, he definitely has an ineffable quality that you can't exactly place a finger on it. It is somewhat in the actions, but you are correct, at least in my opinion, that there's a nonplussed nature to him that just makes him, I don't know, charismatic.
He has a greasy, elegant facade that's about him. He has an ability to put up and just always have the right words. And there's a certain part of him that is also rather brooding, so that he has this, he can put over because he just slips into a character on screen. He's an actor playing a character who has other characters. And so he can slip through and he can charm, he can lie, and people don't catch on. And the audience is in on the joke because you know after the first couple of times that he's also lying and being slippery. And you get in on the joke. And after the first couple of times, you understand that he's doing this, which makes him endearing.
I would liken it to an actor playing con artist in the film. There's certainly a way in which con artists kind of appeal to you. They get your confidence, quite literally. He has a similar circumstance where he can be yelling at the top of his lungs and then he walks out of the room and he smiles like, oh, I'm in on the joke. And that just draws you into him. And he does that 5, 6, 7 times throughout the film that you're like, oh, that's a really cool idea. I didn't think of that, but he did. So he must be really good at what he's doing.
Yeah, you won't learn that in law school. I'll have to teach it to you is when to fake being angry over the phone, when you're in negotiations so that you can get what you want.
I think you've already taught that to me. I've used it on a couple of occasions. I mean, I've been your chief negotiator for almost 10 years.
True.
So, Dad, are you ready to dig more into the film? Do you have our plot summary ready for us?
I do. In the grimy streets of 1930s San Francisco, Private Eye Sam Spade finds himself entangled in a web of deceit, betrayal, and murder. When his partner is killed on a routine tail job, Spade is pulled into the orbit of a mysterious woman, a sinister foreigner, and a hulking brute, all desperate to get their hands on a priceless statue, the elusive Maltese Falcon. As the bodies pile up, Spade navigates the murky underworld with a cold detachment, playing a dangerous game of wits to uncover the truth. In the end, loyalty is a luxury, trust is a weapon, and everyone's after the same thing, the blackbird.
Thank you. Did you know? 8 Maltese Falcons were used for the movie, 2 lead and 6 plaster ones. The lead Falcons weighed about 50 pounds each, and Lee Patrick accidentally dropped one on Humphrey Bogart's foot during shooting. It is on display in the movie museum at Warner Brothers Studios, and its tail feathers are visibly dented from when it was dropped. 3 of the statuettes still exist and are conservatively valued at over $1 million each. This makes them some of the most valuable film props ever made. Indeed, each is now worth more than 3 times what the film cost to make. Did you know? It was producer Henry Blank who gave John Huston what he recalled as the single greatest piece of advice he would ever receive as a director. Shoot each scene as if it was the most important scene in the film. Did you know? Humphrey Bogart had to supply his own wardrobe. This was common practice at Warner Brothers as a way for the studio to save some money. Talk about greed. Did you know? John Huston had Mary Astor run around the set several times before each of her scenes in order to give her a breathless, nervous appearance on screen. You can definitely tell.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know? Warner Brothers planned to change the name of the film to The Gent from Frisco because the novel's title had already been used for the Maltese Falcon from 1931. The studio eventually agreed to keep the original title at John Huston's insistence. And with that, we will take our first break, and we will be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, next week for our 226th episode, we welcome back Betsy and Trent of the Never Seen It pod to revisit another top 10 film on our current list and one of our personal favorites, All the President's Men from 1976. Directed by Alan J. Pakula, written by William Goldman, music by David Shire, cinematography by Gordon Willis, starring Robert Redford, Dustin Hoffman, Hal Holbrook, Martin Balsam, Jack Warden, and Jason Robards. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. All right. Before we get too much further, for each of our guests, what do you guys have going on Movies and Us, and where can people find you?
Yeah, we've got some fun upcoming releases. We will be covering The Princess Bride here really soon, which is another, speaking of classic films, and a beloved for so many people. So I think that'll be a fun combo. We have a guest for that one, Andrew Corrin, so I know has been on the pod with y'all and a good friend of y'all's pod. So that'll be a good time. And then we're reviewing the original Beetlejuice in anticipation of Beetlejuice 2. So we've got that coming up here in the next couple of weeks. Sarah, where can people find Movies and Us?
Yeah, we are also, very quickly before we do that, we are celebrating our 6th podcast birthday, actually here in a couple of days. So 6 years of podcasting, which is just wild. So we have a birthday episode also coming out where we reflect on the last 6 years and on the last year. So yeah, you can find that and all of these episodes. Just search for Movies and Us in your favorite podcast app. And then you can also find us on Threads, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, at Movies and Us Pod.
Sounds great. All right. Now, also, before we get back into the heart of the episode, this is normally our Ask Dana Anything segment. I still don't have the imaging done. I will eventually get that, but I think it's probably funnier that I haven't gotten it done yet. Regardless, we do not have any audience submissions for this week. I'm sorry, Pop. Unfortunately, the episode with all of Eliza's questions went up today, so we didn't get any new ones that I saw yet from her. But I will open the floor. Do either of our guests have anything interesting they would like to ask about my co-host?
So I recently listened to y'all's episode covering The Hangover. So my question for you, Dana, is if you could have a hangover-esque night running around town with any film director, who would it be and why?
Ooh.
Shenanigans galore.
I should clarify, living or dead?
Yeah, that was where I was going.
Either.
Oh, okay. Then that's definite. My favorite director, it would be Hitchcock, because I would be looking for every turn and every subplot and every cliffhanger and every suspense point. I think it would be a blast.
Although I would imagine that your legal degree would come in handy for when he got handsy with whichever women you came across.
Boy. I'm not so sure that I like the connotations there, but okay.
What?
Handsy?
Yes, he got handsy.
As in Hitchcock handsy?
Yes.
Okay, all right, that's fine. As long as it's him and not me.
I was not projecting on you. I said you would need your law degree to help him out.
That's fine. I mean, I know the argument to the judge. Look at him. He's old. He's, I mean, what kind of, what's he going to do?
There are drugs for that these days, Dad.
Yeah, but they don't always work. And I would just point out and go.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I hope you got your just desserts out of that question.
Yeah, we went a whole journey there. That was something.
Anything else that you would like to embarrass us with?
So here's a question. It may have already been asked, and if it has, you don't have to answer. But if you got into some legal trouble, we know a fool represents himself. So if you had to choose a film lawyer, who would you want to represent you if you got into some legal trouble?
This has not been asked. This is a new version, a new perspective question. So I like it. I like it.
See, I would like somebody that would be kind of like myself. Atticus Finch would not, too nice, too pleasant. Like Gregory Peck. It needs to be somebody who's a little conniving. How about Robert Downey Jr. in the film he did, The Judge, where he's kind of always criticizing everybody else's legal work and making fun of the local lawyer and chiding his dad. Yeah, that would be somebody I would choose because it would be similar to my own style.
Mm-hmm. It would be entertaining.
In that situation, you would be the big city lawyer and they would be the bumpkins. That's why I keep coming back to, and you keep striking me down on this, but I would say you would probably go with Paul Beagler, James Stewart's character from Anatomy of a Murder.
Yeah,
sorry, Your Honor. I don't understand all the big city language, but here, let me give you the law book with a lure in it, just to draw your attention, and then let's have this conversation about fishing.
You know the number of times I did that in a trial? Where I did exactly that whole huckster thing. I mean, I had 150 trials. If I had a trial with a lawyer from like the state attorney general's office, well, Your Honor, I'm not a lawyer that's, tied to the state government from big city Madison. I'm just a local guy. It works. Juries eat it up, especially in local little towns.
Well, thank you both for those questions. They were enlightening, to say the least. But let's move on. Best performance was where we left off. Dad, who did you have down?
Oh, Bogey. I know Green Street got nominated. That's why he's my secondary. And Green Street was really good. Bogey makes the film. He's just perfect for the role. I could not imagine. I know that originally they had contemplated or offered it to George Raft. And I'm like, why would you do that? George Raft was like one-dimensional. Bogart had so much more variety to his performance and was so classic in it. So it's Bogey all day for me. And then coming back.
I chose Arthur Edison, the director of photography for the film, because I noticed
interesting. We don't often have a DP.
Yeah, I noticed in the way the question's framed in the prep sheet, it's which person, writer, director, actor, etc. So I really leaned into the etc. here, and obviously there's lots of shadows and blinds and low shots, especially of Sydney Green Street, which I think is really great. So there's a lot of iconic film noir visuals, and as someone that eats up all of the visuals in movies, I just had to give it to him.
Yeah, I took a similar tactic, and I went with the writer and director, John Huston, because it is a really terrific achievement, and if you're writing and directing the film, your fingerprints are all over it. So you wouldn't have this film without him.
I would agree. I went Houston partially because I thought this would be a bogey fest, but it's hard to separate out the fact that this is the one that really launches Bogart as a leading man into the next phase of his career. He'd done some films before this, but none were as big as this. And this kind of, especially with several of the supporting characters, kind of leads right into Casablanca for him. But this is also Houston's directorial debut. And it's hard to ignore that. And the fact that he wrote the script or he adapted it when it had been done 10 years prior. And I do think that there are enough people that probably saw the original that for this to be on a classic level of this type, to get such recognition for the amount of things that are going on with it, to have as many quotable lines in this as there are, I went with Houston by the slimmest of margins, because while Bogart handles almost every scene, I believe he's in every scene that's in the movie, Houston has just a larger footprint on the totality of the movie for me.
The shooting of his partner, he's not. That's the one scene.
Oh, you're right. You're right. Anyway, secondary performance, I had Sidney Greenstreet, much like my father. He's actually extremely charismatic in the role. Despite being the antagonist that's really behind it, although you could say there are multiple antagonists in the film, I think he's the most engaging, the most endearing, because he kind of sticks you with a knife but then smiles in your face. And he's got such a disarming laugh that it just becomes a kind of iconic character. And every time he pops up in one of these 1940s films, you just know, oh, yeah, Maltese Falcon, and he runs the Blue Parrot from Casablanca.
So I chose Mary Astor for this one. And like we talked about earlier. Yeah, I did. Like we were mentioning earlier, she does a lot of the big stuff. You know, the voice gets really high and the shouts are very loud and all of that and whatnot. But I noticed it, especially in the second half of the film. She does so much with these small, tiny looks and glances that I think it can be easy to be distracted by, like the big showy stuff, which was very typical of the time. But as the femme fatale, I think there's these really great little moments that she emotes in very subtle ways that I was compelling to see as we see her role with these other men on screen, figuring out to how to also maneuver and play this chess game that they're in. So I thought the subtle looks and glances that she does really, really help make the performance strong.
That's interesting, because I would actually put her as like the weakest link in the film. Like her kind of breathy, desperate nature. And I know that's obviously intentional, as we got to in the Did You Know section, just is somewhat off-putting to me. It feels so 1940s hammed up acting that it just feels kind of out of place comparative to, you know, several of the other much stronger leading ladies that Bogart was against. Obviously Ingrid Bergman, you eventually got Katharine Hepburn. This one is just like, okay, if we could just have a slight recasting of somebody that's a little bit stronger, has a stiffer upper lip, that's a little bit more believable when they lie, maybe, I might buy into that character. And maybe this film just inches past like Casablanca as being on that upper tier pedestal instead of just like that slight 1B category. But I can appreciate somebody actually liking her character.
Yeah, especially this being the first in many ways of a stereotype. I think there's a lot that she needs to figure out how to do and hold her own. So
that's true. She is defining the character pretty much for the first time. So I guess
that femme fatale, iconic role.
I went in kind of a similar direction and chose a different female character, though. I want to give this to Lee Patrick for her portrayal of Effie. I really appreciated that character. Like, she doesn't do a ton, but I really expected her to do like zero. And so I appreciated that. Even though she's the secretary, she actually helps contribute to the plot. And I appreciated the way that Patrick played her too, because she is able to hold her own against Bogey, who is very charismatic, and she is able to kind of match wits with him when she needs, and she is just holding her own in those scenes. So I was very compelled by her character, and I wanted an opportunity to shout that out. So here we are.
No, that's a good call. He is very reliant on her. He asks for her opinion in multiple circumstances, which is somewhat very progressive for 1941. And I would liken it to a non-screwball version of His Girl Friday.
Mhm.
So definitely a character that you can buy behind comparative to the other two ladies that are in the film, at least for me. Mary Astor and then the Archer's wife, which I forget the actress who played her, but those both seem to be like love-stricken and they don't know what to do around Bogey. Dad, any further thoughts on Sidney Greenstreet?
This film came out when he was 61 years old. He had been a stage actor in London and in New York and finally took this. And that started a string of films. I think he did 9 of them in 7 years until his health started to fail and then he stopped. So, and if you look at the filmography, even the films that were not well known are pretty darn good films. And so, yeah, he obviously had a lot of talent. I'm glad that I got to see him in film and that it's preserved on film because I think he really was a very good actor.
It feels very much like the similar story to Mark Rylance when he kind of converted from the stage to film, and now he's gotten much bigger parts. He's much more well known. I mean, an Oscar helps that, but still.
Yeah.
Most charismatic, I went obviously with Bogart. I mean, it's hard not to go with Bogart. I had to figure out how to divide these two. So, yes, charismatic sometimes becomes the consolation prize, or sometimes you're just too charismatic to go anywhere else. And so, yeah, we've talked about it ad nauseum. I don't really feel I need to justify this pick.
This was my easiest choice, Sidney Greenstreet, for all the reasons Dana just mentioned as well. But he plays the opposite in a lot of ways to Bogey's character and holds his own on screen and is this ping-ponging. For that to be effective, there needs to be the other side that can ping-pong it back, and he is able to do that so well. And there's this like interesting like playfulness about him too, which I thought was really interesting. He's obviously incredibly like gritty and man with a mission, but I love just there's a lightness to the way that he shows up in this performance too, which I think adds to the charisma and the complexity of that character.
Totally agree.
Yeah, I also went with Greenstreet. I instantly knew that I was going there. He steals the scenes that he is in, and he has such an incredible presence in this film and so much joy while being the villain. It's just this really great combination, and I had such a great time watching him. So had to pick him for this one.
Yeah, it's the most mustache twirly, enjoyable villain without having a mustache that I can think of.
I had Bogart, but it was only just barely above Peter Lorre. Peter Lorre was such a iconic presence when he was on screen. You know, it's too bad that he ruined his career with alcohol and heroin. I mean, it was to the point where Hitchcock refused to work with him again after The Man Who Knew Too Much when he did it in London, because he would just disappear for days on end on a heroin bender. The fact that Warner's would put him on lot and put him in 2 different films that year was surprising. He certainly had a certain, I guess it's charisma, and it's kind of, I believe he was Hungarian. I know he was Jewish.
Yes, I believe so.
And he fled because of the rise of anti-Jewish sentiment that was going on during the same time, because the Hungarian leader was associated with Hitler. And so there was a lot of the same situations that were going on. And he fled first to England, then to the United States. But he had a very bright career over a very short period of time.
Let's move to best scene. I have 5 here nominated, but we can definitely add to my list if needed. I have Thursby Murdered, which is the sequence where I guess I should change it to Archer Murdered, because I think that's the more notable character. But basically, the incident where everything really kicks off as far as the revolving action. Then I have Joel Cairo, which is the first appearance of Laurie in the offices. He searches him. There's the struggle for the gun, and so on and so forth. I have the history of the Maltese Falcon, which is the first time that Green Street reveals kind of the backstory of why the Falcon is important. Then I have Gutman testing the Falcon, which I think is one of the more iconic sequences in this, where he's taking the, like, I don't know, is it a Swiss Army knife to the Falcon itself? I'm not sure what that was exactly supposed to do, but yeah.
Pull off the enamel.
And then finally, the resolution between him and Mary Astor. So what did I miss?
It's a great list. The 2 that I jotted down is the arrival of the Falcon to the apartment, which I guess you could argue is maybe the same scene as Gutman testing the Falcon with his Swiss Army knife, but the arrival and the orchestra, just going nuts during that scene, I think was really, really fun. And then the other one that I had jotted down, which is definitely a smaller scene, but I think like interesting for the landscape of this being a noir, is when we first see Sam with the police detective and the lieutenant, and just kind of understanding his relationship to like these incompetent authorities, I think is another dynamic. He's so quippy and irreverent and witty, but you see that power dynamic between the two, the him versus the 2 of them, which I think is also interesting to set the like relational dynamics of this world.
The only other one thinking about it that I could have really added is maybe the sequence where O'Shaughnessy and Cairo and Spade are basically creating this story out of nothing and trying to sell it to the police. But that's the only other one of note that I would say I might include. So out of these, what is the best scene of the film?
I like the Joel Cairo scene the best, because I think it really kind of sets the tone of the movie, which is Rick knows more. Rick's a kind of a gritty, tough guy. Rick's going to take control of the situation, and none of these people really are going to be able to ultimately prevail over him. He's going to be one step ahead of them and be able to ultimately win in the end. And you get that feeling from this. And it just kind of introduces the cast of characters, and you realize that none of these people, they may be interesting and they may be dangerous and all this, but none of them are going to be able to be a true foil to Rick ultimately. Or excuse me, to Sam ultimately.
Yeah, you're mixing your Bogart
confusing
movies.
Films.
Yeah,
it's very similar.
That's
character.
okay.
Yeah,
I think the most remarkable thing about that entire scene is when he gives him the gun back, and then he just like backs off. Yeah, go ahead, search my offices.
Yeah, with a laugh too. He's laughing the whole time. It's so great.
I am putting my submission in for Gutman testing the Falcon, because we spend the entire film building up, searching for, everyone's like desperately going after this thing, and that like sinking feeling in your stomach when you realize it was all for nothing and for a fake item, a fraud. Just that balloon, the air going out of the balloon feeling, I think is really neat. And because this is like built up and framed as a murder mystery as well, that like the audience anticipation for that moment must have been so high. And then that, that twist or that reveal, I think is really, really fun. And the orchestra's going nuts, and it's a whole big thing. And I think it also really solidifies the thesis of the film as well, that we talked about around the emptiness of greed. And so that's my submission. Put my money on that one.
Yeah, because I'd even add in the sequence where Wilmer kind of ends up taking the fall as part of that entire sequence. I think there's some really good quotes in that about, him obviously having, there's only one Maltese Falcon.
I am going to go with the history of the Falcon, because I love that scene. Just, it's so, obviously you meet Gutman for the first time and he's so compelling, but then the way that it's shot is just so interesting. You know, he's giving all of this exposition and all of this backstory, but it's not boring, and it really helps set up, you know, the next part of the movie. And just, even though it's answering some questions, it's also creating more intrigue about what's coming next. So great to watch, so much fun, and really important to the plot.
This might be a rarity. I don't think we've ever had where we have 5 scenes nominated and all 4 of us go for different best scenes. I have the resolution. I completely forgot until I was watching it again how long that sequence is. Like, I know he confronts her, but that's like a 10-minute sequence where he's going through and he's kind of like trying to justify in his mind, you know, I could let you get away with it, but then you have something over me, and I equally have something over you, and it's mutually assured destruction, even though that hadn't become a term yet. You're kind of watching him think through all of this, but at the same point where she's pleading with him, and I think that actually gives a lot of satisfaction to the audience for everything that you've gone through the entire movie. You're following each of these 2 characters. You don't know exactly how they feel about each other until really that moment where it cements exactly where they stand, because you don't know who's lying. You don't know who to trust. You kind of trust Sam, but Sam clearly has everything figured out in a way that you didn't. I would have never guessed the first time or even the 7th time that O'Shaughnessy is actually Archer's murder. But then when he explains it, it's like, oh yeah, duh. So it just makes sense to have all of that resolution and then not to just shortchange it, to go through it on a point-by-point basis, I think was very rewarding. So that's my best scene. As far as my favorite scene, I like testing the Falcon. I mean, there's so much involved in that, again, from the Wilmer, him taking the push, then, okay, well, we're not going to give up Wilmer, so let's give up Cairo. Oh, excuse me, when we get me involved, all of a sudden, everybody's willing to go in on Wilmer, and then we get the actual Black Bird in. Let's start cutting it up. Oh, that's really deflating. That scene has just so many ups and downs through the entirety of the sequence that I just love it. It's also my most indelible moment when he's actually trying to cut the stupid thing, and it looks like he's barely touching it.
My choice is kind of the scene and sequence that happens right after they all realize that it's fake, and the way that Gutman responds to Cairo and dusts himself off and picks himself up, and he's just again a man on a mission. And there's you'd think that it would take more time to realize, like, oh my gosh, we went through this whole journey, because I, as a viewer, I'm like, we went on this whole journey for this scene, and there's such a letdown that this wasn't the thing that we were looking for. And knowing too cognitively, this man's been searching this for 17 years, and his persistence, his tenacity, the way he's so quickly like, we're going to Istanbul, all right, let's keep it going, you know, let's keep it moving. I think it's such a fascinating window into who this character is, and I particularly love his little wave at the end, and as he leaves through the door, I just cracked up at that moment. It's so perfect for that character.
So what I wrote down 2, they're not scenes, but they're just little moments that just tickled me. And so I wanted to talk about them. One of them is at the very beginning when Miss O'Shaughnessy first comes to hire Sam and Archer, and she's pulling out her money, and Sam and Archer both are just staring at her. And she just keeps pulling out more money, and they just keep staring at her. And I just loved that moment. Like, nothing really happens in it, but it's so comedic as they are, without saying any words, just like, yeah, give us more money. How much are you going to actually give? And then we learn later on that she paid too much money, and that was what tipped Sam off to her. So I loved that little time. And then more towards the end, when Gutman he's talking about how, you know, their journeys and how, like, everything that has happened. And he starts talking about how Bridget slipped away from him. And every time he's talking about her, he's also laughing. And I just, again, back to that whole, like, charismatic thing that he has. And he's the bad guy, but he's so happy about it. And there's this joyfulness about him that just makes him so much fun to watch. So those are my two little moments.
I had favorite scene is being Gutman discussing the Falcon is my favorite scene because just the camera work. I mean, when I started doing some research, it was like, what, 2 days it took them to script out how that was going to be shot. And it was a payoff that was fabulous. As far as most indelible, it's the Gutman testing the Falcon. I mean, I will always, every time you say the Maltese Falcon, I will see Gutman just like, and that to me is always the most indelible moment. That's the moment I always remember. That's number one. Number two is, what's that? That's the stuff dreams are made of, because that is the quintessential ending line of a film. I would honestly say that I'm not sure there's a better ending line to a film. Maybe Casablanca, where it's like, yeah, it's like, well, Louis, this might be the start of a beautiful friendship.
They walk off into the sunset.
Yeah.
There are some pretty great closing lines. I mean, it's up there. I won't dispute that, but there are some pretty great ones. I'm expecting a friend for dinner comes to mind.
Yeah, okay.
The end of Silence of the Lambs. Jen, what's your most indelible moment?
My most indelible moment is the shot of Gutman going to town on the Falcon. So yeah, that one's just, when you think of this movie, it's that crushing feeling of like, this was all for nothing. And you see his desperation too, and the frustration that he quickly recovers from. But that moment, we as audience also, I think, feel the like, this wasn't it. This wasn't it.
And they do a great job of setting that up too, as they like everybody's staring at it, and you get this like form of amazement. Oh, is this going to be it? And then it's not.
Yep, such a good moment. I'm going to round it out. That's mine too. So 4 for 4. Yeah, it's so iconic. And the film, like you guys have said, it's built up to this the whole time. So we're all invested in it. And then, oh, wow, that's not it. So it has so much meaning in addition to being such a fun scene.
So that looks like a good place to stop for our second break. We will be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, as of this last month, all of our episodes are now in video format. That's right, you can see my resting nerd face and all of Dana's famous okays in pristine high definition. So far, we have 9 different episodes now available to watch. Just head to youtube.com/@GMotePodcast, or I have the full video and audio feeds on our website, RonnieDuncanStudios.com/GMotePodcast. Both of those are in the episode description of this episode, so check us out there, and if you do, please like the video or subscribe to us. We would really appreciate it. Dad, do we have anyone to remember this week?
We do. Rachel Lilius, 55, English voice actor and screenwriter. Pokemon, Your Life in April, Hunter x Hunter, and Win X Club. Dillon, 88, French actor. Les Samurai.
Yeah. We will be discussing that film upcoming for the 1967 episode of Revisionist Almanac here.
Oh, okay,
and
I
it
can
should
hardly
be
wait.
Plain Solil.
Plain Solil? Okay.
That's my best. I mean, I don't pronounce French, but
I learned enough French to get around and order a corkscrew at a convenience store. Yeah.
Well, that is important.
I don't know. French is not my forte. And The Leopard. Peter Marshall, 98. American game show host. Hollywood Squares, and an actor. He was in Annie and Ensign Pulver. 5-time Emmy winner. Phil Donahue, 88. American media personality and writer. The Phil Donahue Show. Winsome Sinclair, 58, American casting director. Malcolm X, Amistad, Precious, Too Fast, Too Furious, Inside Man, Higher Learning. He was also a film producer. And Gina Rollins, 94, American actress. A Woman Under the Influence, Gloria, and The Notebook. 4-time Emmy winner, honorary Oscar recipient in 2015.
And so we recognize these here for their contributions with a moment of silence in their honor. Thank you. Boy, we really had both of you kind of rolling in the background with just the pronunciation and the bickering.
Yes, we're like an old couple.
Well, I mean, we are an old couple, 34 years on.
True.
Anyway, let's go to best funniest lines. I have Detective Tom Polhouse. Heavy. What is it? Spade. The stuff that dreams are made of.
I'm going to follow that up with Sam to Cairo. When you're slapped, you'll take it and like it.
I will go with when Sam says to the note taker when he's talking with the DA, good work for keeping up with him.
Joel Cairo. Wise heavy. Very smooth explanation ready. Sam, what do you want me to do? Learn to stutter?
Spade. We didn't exactly believe your story, Miss Wonderly. We believed your $200. I mean, you paid us more than if you had been telling us the truth, and enough more to make it all right.
Gutman to Sam. I am a man who likes talking to a man who likes to talk.
Sam says to Effie, after patting her on the arm a couple of times, you're a good man, sister.
Gutman. Well, Wimmer, I'm sorry to indeed lose you, but I want you to know I couldn't be fonder of you if you were my own son, but well, if you lose a son, it's possible to get another. There's only one Maltese Falcon.
Gutman. I distrust a man who says when. If he's got to be careful not to drink too much, it's because he's not to be trusted when he does.
This is Gutman. Cheersing to Sam. Here's to plain speaking and clear understanding. There's none of it in this movie.
Sam says to the detectives after they ask him about the deaths, how did I kill him? I forget.
Cairo. You bungled it! You and your stupid attempt to buy it! Kanadov found out how valuable it was no wonder he had such an easy time selling it. You imbecile! You bloated idiot! You stupid fathead, you!
Can I change my answer to best performance? I have a new choice.
I was going to say, that's probably your best impersonation you've ever done on the show. Outside of last week when you did Brian's mother. He's not the Messiah. He's a very naughty boy. Spade. Haven't you tried to buy my loyalty with money and nothing else? O'Shaughnessy. What else is there I can buy you with?
Well, I have an idea, but...
I think we all do.
We'll talk about that moment a little bit later for sure.
Yeah.
I have some thoughts about that one. My next one is Sam to O'Shaughnessy. Maybe I do. I'll have some rotten nights after I sent you over, but that'll pass.
Sam says to the detective at the crime scene, you've seen everything I could.
You got any left, Ed?
I'm out. There were
Okay.
a lot of them I could have done, but I just wanted to... I mean, we could have went on for quite a while.
Yeah, it's a very well-written script.
Mm-hmm.
I only have one more. Spade, don't be too sure I'm as crooked as I'm supposed to be.
I have one more. It's a Sam to the attorneys. My guess might be excellent or it might be crummy, but Mrs. Spade didn't raise any children dippy enough to make guesses in front of a district attorney and an assistant district attorney and a stenographer.
I also have one more, and it's when Sam says, I don't know anything about women.
Yeah, we could have kept going. There's so many great lines.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to the Stanley rubric then. Legacy is up first, and for a reminder for our audience, this is a measurement of the legacy of the film from the initial 5 years after it was released up until now. So that's roughly covering from about 1946 to today. How has this been perceived by both the audience and the industry? We divide this category 5 and 5 between those two groups. Dad, as I do every week, would you like to go first or second?
Oh, I'll go first on this one. Okay. For the industry, this is a 5. The industry holds this in such high esteem. It's on all of the AFI lists. It's everybody's, classic. It's, if you're going to pick a Bogart film, it's this or Casablanca. I mean, it's clearly the industry's darling. The public is a different story because, we're getting to a point where a lot of people, if you're under about 50, I'd say, you don't necessarily have an interest in watching black and white films from an older era. So there are a lot of people that are very familiar with a lot of the lines in this film and the general story and know what it's about. So I have to give it higher points from that, but they've probably never seen it. And so I kind of went, because it's so iconic and everybody knows, if you say the Maltese Falcon and you say who is in the Maltese Falcon, I will guarantee about 70% of people will go Humphrey Bogart. That may be the only thing they know about it. So because of that, and because it's so iconic with some of the lines and Bogart and etc., I went with a 3.5 for the public for an 8.5 overall.
As usual, we're not so different, you and I. I believe it is a
Yes.
5 on the industry side of things. The fact that it's one of the great directorial debuts of all time, of one of Hollywood's most famous classic directors in John Huston. It's one of his most well-known films. It's the film that essentially gives us Bogart as a leading man for the next probably decade and a half. One of the more iconic film roles of all time. It's also, as we have mentioned before, probably the singly most tied film to film noir. And as such, it's not much of a case as far as the industry goes. This is a 5 all day and twice on Sunday. However, and many of the points that you mentioned resonate with me, I would say there's a certain name association that obviously you mentioned the name of the film. I think there are some plot points that people might get. It's about a detective story. They might get the character of Sam Spade. I would almost guarantee nobody knows that this is based on a Dashiell Hammett novel or even know who Dashiell Hammett is.
I did.
Well, yeah, because you're a nerd and you're old. But
True. On both points, I'll concede.
by the way, did you do our straw poll yesterday or on Monday?
No, I didn't. I forgot about it. I was trying, I worked all weekend and I was trying to put together the agenda and I didn't, but I suppose I could, at some point in time, just as a,
Well, it kind of defeats the
Yeah.
purpose now. We don't have it in the moment to be able to bring up on the show. Had you bothered to call somebody like you were supposed to for the staff meeting, and they could have held you accountable and told you needed to ask that question, maybe. But anyway,
yeah, I know,
digress.
but sometimes people, you don't want somebody to be a pain in the ass.
Well, that's my entire reason for employment, is just to be the pain in the ass for you. Well, this is
This
getting
was
way
enjoyable.
too into the weeds and the family dynamics right now for a podcast. We need to get off this topic. Anyway,
Okay.
all of this is to say, while I would say that your 3.5 is probably the floor of what I'd be willing to give due to the word association and some of the other factors that are involved, there's a part of me that wonders if I should go to a 4, and in fact I did, because this indirectly influences a lot of other films after the fact that kind of take a lot from this movie as far as its style, its structure, its noirishness. And so I have a 9.
Yeah, I had this as an 8. Totally in alignment. I think this is a 5 for the industry. I really had to think about how does the public perceive this movie. I think the name likely might, people look up into the top right corner of the room and be like, oh yeah, I think I've heard of that. But I think there's a lot of folks that likely haven't seen it, nor might not even know the impact and the kind of root that it is for so many of the films that they do love. So I think the does it resonate with people and have they seen it aspect made me give it a 3. So overall, I'm giving legacy category an 8.
Yep, and I am in line with what everybody's doing. Critics, 5. Of course. For audience, I also had to think about it. My initial instinct was 4, and then I talked with a roommate. She asked what I was watching, and I said The Maltese Falcon, and she did not know what that was. And so I was like, well, maybe my 4 is a little too high. So I knocked it down to a 3.5. So 8.5.
So that is an 8.5 average between the 4 of us. Impact and significance. In the moment that this came out, the fact that they very much talked about doing a sequel, but by the point that they actually were going to do a sequel, both Houston and Bogart had become too pricey for Warner's to be able to purchase them to do a sequel due to the success of this film.
They haven't changed.
Well, yeah, and the whoever's in charge at Warner's just seems to be the same person in a different suit. But anyway, I will say that on an industry perspective, given the fact that this promoted both a mainstream star and a mainstream director, that many of the same people that are in this movie, Peter Lorre, Sidney Greenstreet, are also in Casablanca, which I think is an even more recognizable film. And the fact that it did get even somewhat minor awards attention, despite being, I think at the time, supposed to be much more of a popcorn film as opposed to something that was more critically acclaimed, even though it became that, just because of the structure of how it was made or how well the execution of the film was. I gave it a 4.5 on the industry. I might be able to be talked up into a 5, but you're going to have to make some fairly strong points outside of what I have. On the audience side of it, this was a fairly significantly well-attended and successful movie. It's hard to judge movies of this age as to how they resonated with the public, but given that they were talking about a sequel in an era when not a lot of sequels were being made, outside of maybe like the Thin Man franchise, which, I mean, okay. And for that matter, the Marx Brothers movies, it's really hard to say that there was really too much else, but there had to have been some type of public fervor for this. So I gave it a 4 on that side. I have an 8.5.
It did get a recognition. And I mean, this is well before me, technically. 22 years before I was even born. But Dashiell Hammett was not considered literature. It was just, dime store stuff. It was like how people perceive comic books now. It was not literature.
Hey now, that is a high form of art.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Anyway, so the fact that it got this level of recognition in the Oscars, it was saying something, because this should have been just a throwaway. No one would have paid attention to this at the time, but for the quality of the film. So I went with a 4.5 for the industry. I can't go any higher than that because it still was not bought into by the industry. But the public ate this up. They loved the film, and it had a significant impression on them. So I went with a 4.5. I mean, the fact that it resonated within, made as much money as it did at a time where these type of films were not necessarily in the forefront. I mean, most of the time, people were looking at feel-good stories. This is not necessarily a feel-good story, especially at a time in 1941 when it looked like the world was a powder keg. And so I went with a 4.5 for the public at that time. So, yep, I'm going with a 9.0 overall.
All right, so we have an 8.5 and a 9 on the table. Ladies, what say you?
I gave this a 9.5. I I gave it a 4.5 for the critics. For some of the similar reasons, obviously it got some awards attention, but not necessarily that like groundswell sweep that it you would expect for something that you would give to a 5. So I kind of docked 0.5 off of it for that. And then I gave this a 5 for the public, mostly in looking at the slew of noir films that came after it as being indicative of the reception, and especially this type of film, a lot grittier, darker themes, being new on the scene and it being like really received well, I think is notable as well. Sometimes when things come that are new, there's a little hesitation at first, and there's something that does it really well before it really like ignites and builds that momentum. But this one off the bat just seems to have signaled to studio execs and whatnot, like, the people want this, let's give them a ton of it for the next 10 years. So 9.5.
Yeah, and I gave it a 9, 4.5 for both, for pretty much all the reasons that you guys have already said. It got some Oscar nominations, but it didn't win, so that's why it couldn't get the full 5 from the industry. And then people went and saw this movie. It made money. So those box office numbers and just the fact that a sequel was a potential, and like you said, Jen, it started off this wave of noir films, so people were eating it up. So 4.5 for both, so it's a 9 for that category for me.
And like the last category, it is a 9 average.
You haven't had to do a whole lot of math.
I know. We've been kind of hitting all the same sweet spots here.
Yep.
So 8.5 and a 9 so far. Novelty. Now this one can be a little trickier. This is not a dead set category as to how we judge it. I have been taking it probably over the last several months as a split, much like our first two categories, of the execution on one side and the originality of the concept on the other. If I were to take an originality standpoint argument on this, this is a remake already, basically an out-and-out remake from 10 years prior. They took a movie that was okay, and they just said, well, we don't have any other original ideas. Let's dust this one off and give it to John Huston to do. With a guy that we already have under contract, Humphrey Bogart. Okay, let's do that. So what rescues this film is that it's a very well executed film. It is stylistic. It is very well acted for the most part. I do have obviously my issues with Mary Astor. It's great from the cinematography. It's great from a musical point of view. So I have a 1 for the originality, and I have a 4 on the execution, which I think people might give me a little bit of grief for because this is so iconic and well done. But I do feel that there is a little bit of a rawness to the film that isn't quite there in some of Huston's later works. Like, I think Treasure of the Sierra Madre is a much more crisp film as far as the storytelling. And this does have a few moments where you can just see a little bit, but you can definitely see the stylistic touches and flourishes that he's bound to go for and becomes much more famous for as we go on. So I have a 5.
Okay.
Okay, Dad, fine. What do you got?
Oh, you're turning to me? Okay.
What?
Okay. Well, Kramer,
Okay, let me just pause you for a second for a small anecdote. Okay, you dropped so many okays in an episode. We did almost 3 hours on the Revisionist Almanac episode for 1942 that you had 51 okays that Andrew pulled out, and he was going to put in a montage of just you saying okay over and over and over again.
I was just thinking that I want to make a song out of it, like cut that together, the different tones. Next big hit.
51. Okay.
51.
Okay. That's fine.
I told him he could do it for
Andrew
1967.
will put together an entire video of my okays to put out on social media.
Oh, don't challenge him. He'll do it.
Oh, I know I am challenging him because I know that if he hears this, he'll do it. Because
Yes, he will.
That's just how he is.
Anyway, your novelty score.
You are much, much too hard on this. Because it is okay. There is a.
You are criticizing my take on originality. The man who, well, this is based on a book. It can't possibly be that high.
Okay. All right. I do discount it. I discount it on the fact that it's a reproduction. But again, it's a redo of a film that pales in comparison. So I have to give it higher marks because of the level of execution involved. It has a certain originality because there were not films done about this. In fact, I think that what really leads this to the fact that this did so well, because I don't think the Basil Rathbone films of Sherlock Holmes were done until after this film was done. And I think that what ended up happening is we had a number of films being done based on detective stories, especially British detective stories, and then ultimately American detective stories and the dime novel type of thing. So I think there's a novelty that is associated with it that I have to give it credit for. I think you're too low. Is it ultimately really high? No, I'm going with more of a sweet spot. I went with a 7.5.
All right, we're going to have to call for some relief from our guests because this is one of the largest discrepancies between yours and my number for a while. A 2.5 point spread. So, ladies, you'll have to settle the aggravation between the two of us.
You can go with the wrong opinion or you can go with the wise opinion.
I think I'm going to be the most wrong because I gave this a 10 because
wow.
I looked at this film at the point in time, and then I zoomed all the way out and saw the like legacy, the long tail of all of the films that have been impacted by this film ushering a genre that, like so many of the iconic films that we know and love today, have built on, evolved, grown from visuals, characters, stereotypes, themes that were ushered in through this film. So maybe I interpreted the category in a different way, perhaps, but when it comes to this film push boundaries, create a new genre, I think this film did that and was the first in a lot of ways at this moment in time. So that's my 10. I might have messed up our math and our average here, but I'll my truth.
Okay, so we have a scatter shot so far, which means that, Sarah, you have to go with a 2.5.
Oh, I did not understand the assignment, and I did not go with a 2.5. I'm so sorry. I've messed up our scatter plot of numbers. But I'm going to give it an 8. So I'm kind of in the middle of the two extremes in our group. For a lot of the reasons that we already talked about. It is an early noir, and it was so different from what was coming out, at least in America at that time, and then sets off this string of other noirs. And I also took a more expansive view of this question and an expansive view of film history, and movies are still being influenced by this film today, 80 years later. And the other part of it is it also kind of set off Bogey's career too. Humphrey Bogart became the biggest star, maybe. He's at least up there. And this is one of his most iconic films. And so I feel like he was so influential in Hollywood as well. And this was part of making him. So yeah, I went with an 8.
All right, so that puts it a 7.63 average between the four of us. The least clean number so far.
I am that data point. I'm that data point on the graph where you're like, what happened there? Maybe we just that's the outlier. Remove that from the data set. Just throwing our numbers off. The math is not math.
I mean, you're
Let's see. One person seems to be off kilter.
It's either me or Tom.
Yeah, I was gonna say your 10 is not so much the outlier as my 5 is. I mean, they're pretty much on the same spectrum.
Good. I feel better.
But either way, classicness. Now, this is the least defined of any of our categories. It usually has to do with how well something has aged or not.
Mhm.
If it were a comedy, do the jokes still hold up? Are they potentially offensive? Is there content in here that, ruffles your feathers or makes you pause? I have yet to find the exact right thing. This category can mean a lot of things. It can mean next to nothing. So I usually give this assignment because he takes it as a personal badge of honor that he always leads classicness. But Dad, let's see how wrong you can be on classicness.
Wow. What an introduction. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't get applause for that?
I mean, I can give you the applause. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. This film could be released today with some minor alterations, and it would be still as relevant and poignant today released as it was in 1941. The biggest problem I have with this is that there's a derogatory or demeaning aspect towards women in the film, but it really, unfortunately, was the way reality was in 1941. So I'm going to give it a point down for that very reason, because it doesn't play well. You would have to change how the interaction was with the female characters within the film to do it today. Otherwise, it would be right on, spot on. There's nothing about this film that would be a problem. And so I went with a 9.
So we often start this category off with a baseline 7 and either work up or down. And usually the only points up that we tend to give are for whether it was ahead of its time on particular issues or had some progressiveness to it for its time in history. I don't think you could really say much about that in this film. The other part is timelessness, and I would say that this film is somewhat timeless. I also don't think that there's a whole lot that I'm willing to nitpick. One, I really don't see all that much different between kind of modern detective stories and noirs with their femme fatales in the behavior between Bogart and Mary Astor in this. Like, he knows she's lying. She even says she's lying. I think some of that's true. And he turns her in at the end of the film because, maybe I love you and maybe you love me. I really don't see all that's ill classic per se. There's no domestic violence per se inflicted upon her. She's just kind of a liar. I mean, that could be anybody. So I don't really see too much problematic with that. I give it an additional 2 points from my 7 just for the timelessness factor. I also have a 9.
I was thinking along the lines of Archer's widow.
I mean, you excused before that he was sleeping with her.
I didn't excuse it. I'm just saying it's the 1940s.
Okay, you didn't excuse it, but you gave it a permission structure. I mean, tomato.
Okay, fine. Whatever.
Structure. I love that.
Like I have
That's
some
great.
control over what happened in the 1940s.
I don't know. Maybe you did. We've never seen your birth certificate.
I'm a demigod. Yeah, I agree. Fine.
Release your birth certificate. We'll put it on the website.
Yeah, okay.
All right, ladies, rescue us from our own squabbles here.
I give this a 7. 2 reasons. One, Sam's grabby in a scene with O'Shaughnessy, which I get, like I understand was typical of the on-screen gender dynamics of that time. But the question really is like, did it age well or not? And I think that wouldn't age well with today's audience. There's a lot of like honey sweets and stuff that is part of just like how he's relating to women too, which not the best, but again, factored in for the era that it came out in. And then there's a moment where O'Shaughnessy is talking about how she just comes back from Hong Kong or something like that, and she uses the word Orient, which would not fly well with today's audience as well. So I took a point or two off for that as well. So overall, a 7.
And I'm going to come in the middle with an 8. This film, honestly, I expected it to do worse in regards to women. But it's actually pretty good. Those scenes when Sam grabs Bridget, kisses her without really any warning or consent. I was like, oh, that's not great. But that's really like the biggest like physical thing that happens. And then just some of that ending conversation of like, oh, I love you. Oh, but I love you. And it's like, well, nothing really set that up. That's just kind of out of nowhere. So some of those things, I was like, I think we would need a little bit more than what we got in 1941. But we have Effie, who is a solid secretary. She is helpful. She progresses the plot forward. She is not there as a love interest. And so for that, I was like, okay, yeah, we got some good stuff here. So I went with an 8.
I mean, you could make a diversity case that San Francisco not having anybody but white people in it, even in 1941 seems a little strange, but I mean, it's a 1941 movie. They were only going to picture people in support or service roles if they were racial minorities. So it's probably best that they didn't have them. But either way.
Yeah, San Francisco 1941, the minorities were going to be Chinese or Japanese. That's it.
Most likely. And I suppose for 1941, probably not the best look to be having in your wide-reaching film. But that is an 8.25 average between the four of us. Rewatchability, our most subjective category. On my personal, let's say, rubric scale of our Kieran B test, I have it, so this is divided between half for putting it on and half in leaving it on, and that's for those from the cable era, mostly. As to putting it on of my own volition, this is a film that I don't know if I watch it every year, but it's probably not going multiple years in between. So it's somewhere between about a 3 and a 4 for me. I have about a 3.5 on that side. And then my likelihood of leaving it on if I found it on anywhere, so let's say it's on TCM, yeah, I'm going to probably stop and watch a few minutes. Am I stopping my day? Probably not. Am I planning it to watch it later? Maybe. So it's probably about a 4. So I have a 7.5. So whomever would like to go.
I defer.
Ooh.
Oh, suspense building. I am intrigued now. I gave this a 9. I think the dialogue is so fun and dynamic and so fast. It's every line and every scene. There's so much joy in each of it. And so I think the rewatches are going to be really fun because, just being able to like soak in those again, I think is awesome. You just kind of want to hang out with this like motley crew of big personalities. I dinged 1 point off because I think the first time watching this film and experiencing the twists and turns is obviously going to be the best. And so every rewatch, you kind of can, what's coming and you can anticipate them. And so inevitably for any mystery, thriller, suspense film of any kind, I think it's going to be a little bit different than your fresh first time watching it. So my overall score is a 9.
Mine is very similar to yours, Tom. I did a 3 for putting it on. I probably haven't watched this movie in, I don't know, maybe like 8 years going on. So like it's been a while since I watched it. But if it's on, I would give it a 4. Like I'm probably gonna sit down and watch a little bit. I don't know if I'd watch the whole thing, but I would definitely want to experience that again. So I would give this a 7.
All right, Dad, bringing up the rear.
Watching this film again, I always remember every time I watch it, why is it I haven't watched this more often? To me, it's comfort food. I can put this on, and maybe we'll call this, for me personally, the Hogan's Heroes test, which is, it's a show that I grew up on when I was a kid. I could put it on. It doesn't matter. I can watch 2 minutes of it. I can just leave it on in the background, and I'm going to pick it up and go, oh, this is fun. I like this. This is good. Okay. And this film to me is that way. You can watch any part of this film and enjoy what you're watching. You can continue to watch it. You could just, all of a sudden, you need to go back to what you were doing. You have to answer an email or write some paragraph for something you're working on. And, go back and go, oh, yeah, now it's to this scene. Okay, so to me, it's just comfort. So I give that, where it's a regular rewatchability, something that I enjoy and I don't have to pay attention to and still enjoy parts of the film, I give it an 8. Do you need help with the math?
Nope.
Okay.
That is a 7.88 average between the four of us. Now, I do want to point out that I think for the last 6 films that we've done, you have made the exact same comment. Why haven't I rewatched this more?
I know.
I think you need to either rewatch films or stop making that comment. But anyway, I digress. So for audience score on this one, we had a 76 for Google users and a 91% for Rotten Tomato users. Not really sure what's going on with the Google users on this one, but that gives us an 8.35. So to repeat the categories, we had an 8.5 for Legacy. We had a 9 for Impact and Significance, a 7.63 for Novelty, an 8.25 for Classicness, a 7.88 for Rewatchability, and an audience score of 8.35, giving us a final total of 49.61, and currently placing it on our list
About 7.
at number 63 between
Ooh.
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and It's a Wonderful Life.
Wow, I thought it was higher based on that, but okay.
No, the top 10, I think you have to have at least 54 points to even crack the top 10. So out of 60.
Okay.
But anyway, if you disagree with any of our scoring, you can certainly write us at greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com. Write us on our website, RonnieDuncanStudios.com/GMotePodcast, or you can find us at GMotePodcast on any of our socials, Instagram, Twitter. We made an executive decision last week that we were not calling it X. Screw you, Elon. TikTok, and Letterboxd. With that, remaining questions. If the proposed sequel had been able to go on, could this have become a successful franchise series?
The proposed sequel was more of Bogey as the PI tackling more cases, I'm assuming.
I would assume, because there were multiple Dashiell Hammett novels focusing on
yes.
Sam Spade, that it would be from the same line. I just don't know what it would be, because I thought Maltese Falcon was the first one, but I want to say there's like 10 Spade novels.
Then hell yeah. Yeah, I definitely think so. Seeing the way that Bogey went on to be a star, clearly, I mean, the charisma, like we talked about in our conversation today, is dripping off the screen. And so just to like spend time with this character and follow his next adventure, I think people would buy into, and that format and that structure has been established in the literary world as well. And so being able to follow like a character invested in as they tackle the next case with another large cast of colorful characters, I think would have been really compelling. I did read, I didn't know about this, but there's in 2024, I think it was January, there was a TV miniseries called Monsieur Spade that was released with Clive Owen in it. And so that was a fascinating choice. And I was thinking about that when I read this question as far as franchising of this world and these characters. So I don't know how that show did, but fascinating choice.
I think it was popular among critics, but didn't really cross over into the general audience.
And that show was just recently added to Netflix, so I'm curious to see if it's because that's one that I wanted to watch, but I didn't have whatever subscription it was, but I saw it come up on Netflix, so it's now in my to watch list. So we'll see. Jenna, I will report back once I watch it.
Please do.
But yeah, I think if in this universe of a potential sequel, if they could get Bogey to come back, then yes, it could have been a success. You know, I think if you could get John Huston too, like that would be even better, but you can't do a sequel, I don't think, without Humphrey Bogart at the center of it. So I think if they got him, then it could have been a successful series.
For me, I mean, there were a lot of sequels because Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce's Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson throughout the 40s was a huge successful series. The Thin Man with William Powell was another successful series. So I think
and Myrna Loy, if I remember right.
Yeah, Myrna Loy was the wife in that. I want to say there was at least a couple of films before they became more prevalent on Hercule Poirot that were written by Agatha Christie, which I'm taking a couple of them on my vacation this week to read because I've been working through all of the 50-some Hercule Poirot novels. So I think it would have been an interesting sequel.
Does Spade actually have the real Maltese Falcon? This is the number one unanswerable question that I've always had, and I gravitate to each side of it each time that I watch the film. There's part of me that believes when he says, the stuff that dreams are made of, it's the real thing. And they just, for whatever reason, couldn't like cut the enamel off enough for it to be there, but he somehow knows that it is. But then how would you know? So is it real? Is it fake?
My headcanon is that the Maltese Falcon doesn't even exist. And that we're all just chasing like air. Because I think it'd be fascinating to just think about that in terms of the theme and the thesis of the film itself is like, what are we've built this like narrative and this hype and this energy and this legend and this lore around this thing, and that gets passed, from generation to generation, and sometimes there's nothing there. So that is my cynical answer to this question, is that it don't even exist.
I like it. I want to accept your headcanon as my own, because I kind of ended up with like, I don't know. And I appreciate that even though you can ask that question at the end of the movie, and the movie does lend itself to that, it also just, it doesn't matter what the answer is. Both of them, come back to that theme of greed and how people will do anything to pursue greed. And so that theme still holds up no matter what answer you say. And I think that that's also really interesting.
Yeah, if we're getting into the territory of the wishful thinking of what we'd like the actual ending to be instead of it explained, I'm going to go the opposite route. We've seen Bogey get the one-upsmanship on everybody, be the smooth talker, whatever else, and yet we're all on the inside joke with him the entire time. Why can't this be one more example of that, where he knows exactly what it is, and just because they've all decided to move on doesn't mean he has to, because he knows it's the real one. All right, finally. Is the Maltese Falcon the possible single best from set prop you could own?
No.
All right, Dad, you're shaking your head. What do you got?
Ruby slippers.
That's a good one. I had that on my list too. I had the Lord of the Rings ring and lightsaber. That's the one that I personally want. Yes.
Yep. How about the Indiana Jones fedora?
Mm-hmm.
Or the whip.
Yeah. I don't know if, you'd have to explain why you have a whip with you, but, yeah.
You don't need to explain.
You just whip it out. Okay. I'm trying to think of other like really iconic ones though. The briefcase from Pulp Fiction. That'd be up there. But yeah, this is pretty high on the prop list.
The flamethrower from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Maybe not quite.
The burn book from Mean Girls.
Ooh. Mm-hmm.
The sunglasses either from Top Gun or The Matrix.
Oh, yeah.
Those would be pretty cool. Any remaining questions for any of you?
I had one question on here, which is not a real question. It's just of when that scene was unfolding. I was like, man, I wish this character played a funny little role. But my question is, where did Wilmer go? And I really wanted him to
As far
be the
away
one.
as possible.
Desert island, just hanging out, sipping a margarita. I really wanted him to have like one last little impact on the plot in some way, because in my head he was like the Tom character of Succession, like the one that gets overlooked, the one that, you know, isn't a real player with these 4 incredibly smart chess players that are playing 3-dimensional chess. But I wanted the fact that they overlooked him to be his last little jab that he gets to make. So that is the justice I wanted for the Wilmar character, because he's such a side character and is just getting tossed around by all these big guns. So I wanted him to have a little say.
So if he's the Tommy Wamsgans of this universe, who is his Greg?
Oh, sorry, I meant Greg. He is the Greg.
Well, then reverse the
Yes.
question.
Who is his?
Well, that's probably an awkward note to leave off on, which matches up with the rest of the evening. But I want to thank both of our guests for being here. Just remind everybody again where they can find you and what you guys are working on.
Yeah, you can find us on all of the major podcasting distribution platforms. So your Apple Podcasts, your Spotify, all that goodness. And then you can also find us on the socials. So Instagram, Threads, Twitter. We also use Twitter instead of X, and TikTok as well. And yeah, it's the fall, which there's going to be so many great releases by some really, you know, great directors and all of the indie films that come out in the fall, as well as we head towards season. So we'll definitely be covering a lot of those. But in the immediate term, we've got some birthday episodes, Princess Bride, Beetlejuice 1, and anticipating for this second one coming out soon.
Mm-hmm. And we are starting to mix in some older films too. So there's a good mix of new releases that people are excited about, and then some old faves. So there's a lot more variety coming up through the rest of the year. So there's lots to look forward to.
Excellent. Well, it was great having you both, and thank you again. Dad, any remaining thoughts for the week?
I'm about ready to start my vacation, and I have a whole list of films that I have saved on my DVR from DirecTV. I'm looking forward to watching. I have not seen, for example, Kramer versus Kramer since I saw it in the movie theater in 1978. So that's one of the films I intend to watch while I'm on vacation.
Nice.
You know, you're all about these like feel good films and relaxing films, and yet you're going to watch that on your vacation?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, if you want a double feature, Sophie's Choice is sitting right there.
I have it recorded.
All right. I'll
Nice.
take a second to recommend a television show that I've kind of got a ride or die status on. Like, it's right up there with Severance for me as the best show, and The Bear. Of course, The Bear. As like the best shows on TV right now. And it just came back for its 3rd season. It is a critic darling, but not one that is generally watched by a lot of people. And that would be HBO's Industry. Just got it through its 2nd episode of the 3rd season, and I mean, my goodness, those guys throw fastballs every single episode, so it is engaging. I don't understand half the jargon that goes on in that show because it has to do with stuff that's way above my head, and yet I follow it completely. The characters are all reprehensible, but they're still endearing. I don't quite get why they all work, but they're still, it's an engrossing series. And if you haven't tried it before, it's a very easy binge. So you can catch up if you have Max. So that's going to do it for us this week. Thank you for listening. Nothing's riding on this except the First Amendment of the Constitution, freedom of the press, and maybe the future of the country. Not that any of that matters, but if you guys fuck up again, I'm going to get mad. Next week, for our 226th episode, we welcome back Betsy and Trent of the Never Seen It pod to revisit another top 10 film on our current list and one of our personal favorites, All the President's Men from 1976. Directed by Alan J. Pakula, written by William Goldman, music by David Shire, cinematography by Gordon Willis, starring Robert Redford, Dustin Hoffman, Hal Holbrook, Martin Balsam, Jack Warden, and Jason Robards. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Please like, follow, rate, and review, or whatever on whichever platform you have so that more can join in our fun. You can also email the show at thenewRonnieDuncanStudios.com or at greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com. Or find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, or TikTok at the handle @GModePodcast. The Greatest Movie of All Time is a production of Ronnie Duncan Studios. Our show is mixed, edited, and written by Thomas Duncan. Our music is thanks to Purple Planet Music. Our technical provider and distributor is Captivate FM.